My name is Charlotte Sparks. I'm from Jackson High School. I'm in 11th grade, and my science fair project was over how if COVID-19 symptoms have any correlation to blood types. The purpose of my experiment was to see if one blood type was more susceptible or that their symptoms were more drawn out. The hypothesis for this was that I didn't think there was any blood type that was more susceptible or more likely to contract COVID. I had 22 participants that took a survey, and those who didn't know their blood types at the time, I had to test their blood types. But in the survey, they would put down their blood type and then their COVID symptoms and tell about how long they had them. The data collected showed that there really wasn't any outlier or anything that showed that there was a pattern. There were possible connections between the positive and negative blood and compared to the loss of taste and smell, but otherwise there was no patterns. My question was, are certain blood types more susceptible for different symptoms of COVID-19 and how long it lasts? This is just asking if one blood type is more likely to contract COVID-19 than the others. The purpose of this experiment was to see if one blood type was more susceptible, measured by the survey that I sent out to my participants, and if my hypothesis were to be correct, I wouldn't find any correlation or pattern in them. There's my hypothesis, just stating again that one blood type is not more likely to contract or show as many symptoms than the other. My materials were my Google form that I used. I had consent papers for the participants and their parents because the ones who were getting their blood typed had to have a consent form from their parents. I needed A, B, and Rh factor antigens. This is just the proteins that are in the blood, and they clot if you have that certain protein. I needed stirring sticks to stir the antigens and the blood together, and then I needed plastic slides and white paper to have it on. The gloves and goggles were for the people who were taking the blood from the participant, and then the lancets is what we drew the blood with. So my procedure was to hand out the permission form to the participant and get the, I had two permission forms, and I had to get the other one to their parents. I had to set a time to get together all the participants for testing their blood types if they didn't know. For those people, I had to place all three antigens on that plastic slide and white paper, and then the participant had to prick themselves with one of the lancets to draw blood, and they had to place 3 drops of blood on the slide next to each of the antigens. With the stirring sticks, I had to mix the blood with the antigens, and whichever of them clumped meant that that was the kind that they had. And then I had to make sure to send out the survey to everyone and gather information about their COVID-19 experience. These are my data tables. Those are my blood types that I had and if they contracted COVID or not, and this is compared to the blood types and if they quarantined or not. This is the big data table with all of the symptoms of COVID that I found. I didn't see any correlation except for maybe the negatives. The A negative and B negative had a very high spike of taste and smell because several of those participants still have not gotten their taste and smell back. Some of the higher concentrated ones were O negative, A positive, and B positive. They just seem to have the higher amount of symptoms for longer, and then the O positives seem to have the least amount. In conclusion, I found that positive A and B have more concentrated and longer symptoms. Positive O, it didn't have a lot of symptoms for a long period of time, and then in the negatives, the taste and smell lasted is still going on to this day. A negative negative and O negative in my data was more likely to get COVID-19. And if this were repeated, I would need to gather more evidence and more people over a longer period of time just to test a few more things. But in the end, I didn't find a discernible pattern that stood out. In the data, it shows that there was no discernible pattern again. Nothing specific stood out to me. The prolonged symptoms were in the negative blood types, and there was a possible connection between blood and how positive and negative blood and how they are affected. If certain symptoms were more prominent in different blood types, and then the experiment would need to be repeated. Next time I would give myself more time to test people and make sure I find out what they do on a day-to-day basis and if they wear their mask, that kind of thing. I would also get the same number of the different blood types. I didn't do that this time. And since the vaccines came out, I would look into see and how that affects someone's ability to contract COVID-19. I would regulate this along with knowing if the person had quarantined or not, and I would consider making several test groups, people who didn't quarantine compared to people who did, and ultimately the goal would be to find a correlation between COVID-19 and different blood types.